Welcome back. So, why does Japan sexualize female video game characters? This is a question I get asked all the time. Um, and I feel like this question is incredibly misleading, to be fair. I think sometimes we need to remove our ethnocentric lenses and try to understand different societies in a different light, right? Try to understand how their perspectives could be different than Western perspectives and vice versa. Otherwise, we don't really develop, critical thinking, and this just leads us to ignorance. All right, so um, it has nothing to do with sexism, misogyny, malicious intent, or other incredibly stupid, highly opinionated shit you run into on, Reddit and other echo chamber social media platforms and sites that just cater to virtue signaling. Pseudo intellectual morons who think they know more than the rest of the world, know more than the rest of us, and they never bother to do any research in the first place before speaking on the matter. Anyway, it's true that Japanese games and anime influenced media do use exaggerated or sexualized character designs more openly than many Western mainstream games do. That is true. So think of the busty bartender in Tifa Lockhart in Final Fantasy VII, or Cammy's bare ass cheeks and Chun-Li's thick muscular thighs in the Street Fighter series, right? That's something a lot of gamers point out. And then there's like, I don't know, the teenage ninja princess Kasumi and her seductive shinobi trope from the Dead or Alive series, if you're familiar with that. And I hope you weren't gooning to these descriptions. If so, shame on you. Anyway, back to the big picture here. So there are several cultural, commercial, and historical reasons behind this trend that are going to help explain this. Okay, so let's start with the first one. You want to think about the different media traditions that come out of Japan. So think about Japanese manga, anime, and games, and how all of these basically evolved together in a specific set of time. And notably, this was after the decades between the 1970s and 1990s. So there was this boom in otaku culture. And if you're unfamiliar with that, it's basically this like major like hobby culture. So there were people who were really hardcore into video games or anime or manga or other things outside of these three as well. Maybe movies, music. It could be anything really. And this involved stylized characters, exaggerated femininity, and fan service, which became common genre conventions, during these decades, right? And in some segments of entertainment, it wasn't in every aspect of entertainment or every kind, but it was something that was noticeable in some parts of it. And the second thing you really need to understand here is that, who were they catering to? Like, who were the target demographics involved here? So, why have sexualized characters in the first place? Um, you know, uh, if there's no demand for it, right? Or if it's gonna create backlash. So many of these games are designed for specific audiences, no shit. And obviously, in this case, in Japan's case, this involves young men, young adult men, for the most part. And so the character designs are often meant to, attract attention from them, build fandoms, which is huge in Japan, and, more importantly, sell merchandise, right? Or even create some memorable, unforgettable mascots. And the third thing that we need to really pay attention here is that there are diverse or different attitudes toward fiction. So in Japan, there tends to be like clear separation, right? between, say, something like fantasy media on the one hand and real life behavior dynamics in public discussions or just in the public, right? So when it comes to these sexualized fictional characters, regardless whether they're main characters or NPCs, what have you, they may not carry the same degree of like social stigma there in these video games and anime and whatever than they do in some Western conversations. Okay, so it is permissible to observe these things, right? These characters. It's okay to kind of you know, uh, have them involved in your life in this capacity. And another point to consider here is just the way the influence of anime aesthetics actually works. So you have like these large eyes, these youthful, jovial appearances in these characters. They tend to wear elaborate or traditional costumes sometimes. And more importantly, you notice there are like exaggerated, heavily exaggerated body proportions, right? It almost seems like at times, not saying it's always the case, but when it comes to a lot of them, it's almost like pornographic in nature, right? Really exaggerated, almost fake, right? So think like titties, ass, legs, thighs. You don't even need to picture it. You can actually visualize it. You could see it. It's pretty clear as day. And they're just part of this long established anime visual language, right? And this style influences games from companies like Nintendo. Yes, I know Nintendo, for the most part, is more family oriented, a little bit more PG-13 or PG even, but they do have like some games that cater to this as well. And Capcom, Square Enix, Konami, other developers and publishers are involved in this, and many others, and they each use it in slightly different ways. And of course, not surprisingly, there are economic incentives to these sexy female characters. So they're attractive or provocative, so they can increase visibility and merchandise sales. That's not surprising. Uh, and when it comes to mobile games, gotcha games, figurines, posters, cosplay culture, right? If you've ever been to a expo, you would know what I'm talking about. These all reward visually striking designs, Uh, but the thing is, not all Japanese games do this either. Like I mentioned, there is like this degree of variation as well. So think of some games like Animal Crossing, Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda series, right? They're super popular even in Japan, but they're more family friendly, right? And you know, at least compared to these heavily fan service focused titles that are night and day different than them. So think about like something like I don't know, Princess Peach or Princess Zelda in these Nintendo titles. They're not really sexy or they're not catering to people in that way. All right. Not to mention, Japanese media also sexualizes male characters. This is something that's unknown to a lot of folks in many genres aimed at women. So this goes both ways, actually. It's just not as talked about as much as, these female characters. All right. So the last point I want to mention, you also want to pay attention to global influence and how it goes both ways, basically. So Western games have also historically sexualized characters too. So think about the 90s, maybe, especially in these earlier eras like the 90s, because we had like Laura Croft in Tomb Raider, right? As a prime example, really unforgettable. In fact, at some point, I think it was in the early 2000s, maybe it was late 90s. I don't even remember. I didn't even care about that movie, to be honest. but even Angelina Jolie, right, a famous sex icon, even played as Laura Croft, right? In case you've forgotten, I hope you don't have a short-term memory. Anyway, recently, however, it's true though that Western AAA studios have shifted toward more, realistic or diverse character portrayals that kind of reflect like female in society today, in Western society at least. While some Japanese studios, they just continue with their own stylized traditions. So they've kind of they're just different in that regard. It is what it is. And finally, if you were to ask me, I personally think that it's also possible that Japan as a society is quite worried about their severe demographic crisis. I'm sure you've heard this many times before. It's not something new because the annual number of births has hit consecutive record lows, annual lows, and the population is just shrinking rapidly, and I don't know, therefore it's not like surprising that the Japanese government, the authorities, the politicians involved, they may consider the situation as a critical national emergency, and as far as I know, they do consider this as an emergency. And if that's the case, which it is, obviously this threatens their cultural, economic, and societal future, right? It's a serious issue. It's a big deal. So, um, while the inclusion of sexy female characters in video games, anime, and manga, and elsewhere in Japanese society probably isn't actively encouraged, nor is there a mandate for this trend by the government. I'm sure there is something that's seen. I'm sure that just the situation itself, rather, is seen in a positive light by the government because it could maybe, it's not guaranteed, but maybe it could encourage a lot of their young adults to try and have more sex on average, right? More sex um, often, and maybe this is just all wishful thinking. I don't know, but they hope that this may lead to procreation, right? They'll have kids. So, it seems logical if you were to ask me. They want to expand their population, not shrink it. This could be a subconscious way of encouraging that. So, it's just something to consider here. Whether or not it could be effective, who knows? Who knows? Time will tell. Now, having covered all that, it's also worth noting that opinions, beliefs, right, feelings toward this particular issue inside Japan are indeed mixed, right? So some Japanese players and creators, they've criticized the excessive fan service, while others they see it as some harmless form of entertainment or just an artistic style. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. So there isn't one like, single Japanese view on this subject. So even in Japan, this is something that does divide people and it's, controversial to some degree. Anyways, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.